What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Breakout Finder videocast. I'm your host, Nate Liss. You can find me on Twitter at @AnOutrageDew. And with me, as always, is Mr. Ryan Lopes. You can find him on Twitter at StillRyan5. And tonight, without webcam, but it's still all right because he plans on bringing the fire tonight, or the fantasy sauce, as the overlay might say. We have got Scott Barrett, and you can find him on Twitter at ScottBarrettDFB on Twitter. Scott, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. The mic being down is just an excuse to not put on clothes. I know you guys said you don't mind, but I'm feeling a little bashful today. Doing good. Excited to bang out this podcast. Been wanting to hop on this podcast for quite some time now. Heard it's buddy. No,
we were kicking it in the DMs a little beforehand, and you mentioned you were looking for a mic and you were looking for pants. I told you, dude, just cross off the pants. We don't need pants where we're going.
Not on this show. So either way, you don't have your video going anyway, so we don't know that you put them on in the first place. But exactly. As Ryan's going to tell you, Scott, on this podcast, there's no playing around. This is the most serious podcast on the internet. We like to get down to business. We know that your mind is full of some of the greatest fantasy nuggets in the universe, maybe the galaxy. And Ryan's goal is to extract them. So Ryan, hit him up, man, right here.
So Scott, we're gonna get to it in a little bit, bro. You just dropped the must be a couple years now, buddy, like 3-4 years. How long have you done the My Guys piece? So I'm very excited to talk about your guys. We'll get to that in a little bit. But first, some kind of news and notes, some relevant news and notes. The Houston fallout, man. Let's talk about the Houston fallout. What are your feelings in Houston post Lamar Miller? We're talking obviously about Duke Johnson. Where was Duke Johnson beforehand for you, and where is Duke Johnson now that he essentially has sole possession of that backfield?
Yeah, there was one question I was hoping you guys wouldn't ask me. It'd be this one.
It is. It's hot, bro.
I'm still really torn on what to do here. I'm redoing my rankings tonight, so I'd probably have a better answer tomorrow. But I did look at it a little bit, over the past 3 seasons when Lamar Miller has missed time. Alfred Blue has seen something like 18.5 touches per game, 15.0 fantasy points per game, like pretty good volume, better volume than Lamar Miller typically sees, about like 66% of the snaps. When Lamar Miller's healthy, we've seen him get spelled by inferior backs quite frequently. I think Bill O'Brien is a coach who likes to go with a committee situation. His team's going to be very run heavy. Since he's taken over as head coach of the Texans lead the league in rushing attempts. The problem is he just doesn't target running backs too frequently. It's typically a committee situation. Duke Johnson, what's his best attribute? That's pass catching. Targets are about 2.7 times more valuable than carries. So if he's given a full bell cow workload, he has legitimate high-end mid-range RB1 upside. I just don't know that that's going to be the case. Jay Ajayi sat on the couch all offseason. No one showed any interest in him. He's now on the Texans. I think what's most likely is it's going to be he dominates, the early down work, maybe 65% in his favor. Duke Johnson gets, the rest of the snaps, in which case he's just, a mid-range RB2. But really, I'm kind of all over the place. His range of outcomes is could be really great, could just be another Lamar Miller 2.0. What do you guys think?
Couple of things. I'm excited to get Nate's take here because I know Nate and I have talked about Duke a few episodes now. I think we're both Duke fans. It sounds like you more or less believe in Duke's talent. Real quick before we kick it to Nato here, Scott, did Jay Ajayi 100% get signed? I thought the dude from the Houston Chronicle, whatever, came out and said that there was no interest. Did that happen?
I don't know. Like I said, I have to do my rankings.
Okay.
In a few hours,
Yeah, I'm not sure that the Ajayi thing went official yet, but obviously the second question I was going to ask Scott again before we kick it over to Nate and Nate's Duke takes is there a runner, Scott, that you would prefer to see the Texans, sign for, trade for, whatever the case may be, or are you confident enough, again, in the talent of Duke Johnson, but just maybe not the potential volume?
Yeah, so I think Kenneth Dixon is going to get cut this weekend. Tampa Bay holds waiver priority over Houston.
Okay.
If I'm the Texans, I'd definitely trade a low-end pick for Kenneth Dixon, who has been one of my guys for a really long time. I just really believe in that talent.
Sure. Nate, dude, give us all pour your heart out for Duke Johnson right now, buddy.
Man, well. First off, man, I obviously I'm a fan of Duke Johnson. Anybody that's listened to me for a while knows I'm a fan of Duke Johnson. A lot of us have believed the entirety of his career that he's been behind somebody, and that's not for lack of talent. I mean, as Scott said, he may not be going to the most pass-happy opportunity, but there's really nobody in front of him. I mean, we've yet to see Jay Ajayi as he's coming back now as he's been signed. Duke Johnson was traded, and I don't remember exactly what the trade information was, but it was a conditional fourth that could become a third, and I imagine it's based on usage. And with Lamar Miller being gone, it almost seems certain that the Cleveland Browns are going to end up with a third-round pick out of the deal. But Duke Johnson on limited opportunity share on just 22.3% of the share last year in Cleveland. He ended up number 16 in the league in receptions, number 14 in receiving yards. Obviously, his rushing opportunity was really low, only 40 on the year. This is a player that we know is super dynamic, has a very high agility score. We know he's great in the open field. And Deshaun Watson is going to be a great fit for him. I mean, he's coming off of Baker Mayfield, who everybody is a fan of. But I'm a big fan of Duke Johnson. And without Lamar Miller there, I don't know that Jay Ajayi is nearly the threat that a healthy Lamar Miller would have been with his, rapport in that offense and the trust of that coaching staff in Lamar Miller. So I'm still a big fan of Duke. I'm buying Duke. I just got him in a fantasy draft recently, I think in the 8th round of a PPR draft. And for the upside, like Scott said, that he could potentially be a mid-range, RB1, I love that. I'm all over Duke Johnson.
Yeah, man. So it's I'm excited that Scott already threw out the Kenneth Dixon tout. That's a perfect way to kind of start the show. Obviously, it sounds more or less we're all on board the Duke Johnson train. It's just as Scott kind of caveat, it's about Bill O'Brien's approach and kind of what Houston wants to do. It would appear that things have lined up nicely for Duke to kind of get that bell cow workload as Scott suggested. So Scott, the other big headline, man, I was out this Saturday. We were watching the Florida-Miami game, and right in the middle of the game, Andrew Luck walking away, man. So that is obviously the big headline out in the NFL right now. So much like the Houston the Houston fallout, Scott, the Indianapolis fallout post Andrew Luck, what did you end up doing? I know you're freshening up your rankings tonight, but anything high level you want to discuss as far as Andrew Luck's impact, Andrew Luck leaving, his impact on TY Hilton, whether it's Funchess, any of the running backs, and the tight ends. What do you got for us?
Yeah, this one I did get to. So what am I doing with Marlon Mack? I did drop him, but I'm also probably higher on him than most. So last year he was in a committee with Nyheim Hines, ceding targets to him. So it wasn't a very valuable role. He was very game script dependent. Something like 70% of his fantasy points came in games Indianapolis won by 14 or more points. With Brissett under center, that's going to be less positive game script. But this preseason, it's been used as a bell cow back. Towards the tail end of last season, he was used as a bell cow running back. So I think we're going to see a shift towards him getting more routes and targets, in which case the negative game script isn't going to hurt him too much. I do like Jacoby Brissett, who has some Konami code upside. I wouldn't look too much at 2017. Frank Reich is a big upgrade over Chuck Pagano, Rob Chudzinski. T.Y. Hilton obviously gets dinged a bit. So across the last 6 seasons, he averages 16.2 fantasy points per game with Luck, 11.2 without Luck. That's really not good. I moved him down, not as strong as those splits imply. I think he's still going to the number one target on this team. But I did move him down. And then I actually think Eric Ebron, who I've faded all season, is a slight winner, while Jack Doyle is a massive winner. Jack Doyle out-targeted Doyle in games they were both healthy last year. This preseason, Doyle has out-snapped Ebron. Doyle was Brissett's favorite target in 2017. He saw a 26% target market share in games both were active. That's absurd. That would have ranked 7th among all players, not just tight ends, but all players.
Crazy. That's a crazy nugget.
Yep. And then all throughout Jacoby Brissett's history, he's targeted tight ends at an absurd rate, like one of the highest rates in the league, dating back to college from 2014 to 2015, 2016 to 2018, both during the regular and preseasons. Frank Reich historically loves to target the tight ends. So the big news from this, I think, is, upgrade Jack Doyle, slight upgrade Eric Ebron. Everyone else falls a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think Doyle was the player that I slid up in my rankings the most. I know Ebron was. I think Ebron kind of corrected itself as the offseason marched, and a lot of people had him kind of in that top 10 slot initially, and backed him down, and then obviously now with Andrew Luck out of the picture, backed him down even more so. Nato, any thoughts about these Indianapolis Colts skill position guys? Obviously, our guy Paris Campbell, man, we gotta moment, bro. Wait, time out. Wait, what are you doing? What is that?
What's what?
What is that in your hand?
This is a not a White Claw, is what I call it. It's Truly.
See, bro, we've gone on and on about White Claws for episodes now.
Honestly, I kind of feel like White Claw has been hanging up on us for this sponsorship deal. I was gonna, to be honest with you, I was gonna post a picture of me drinking a Truly on our Patreon account. That was my plan, because people know that we're on the White Claw train. Scott, do you drink White Claw?
I do not.
Do they ban White Claw in Texas? Not manly enough? Is that just like been deported out of the state?
Yeah, it's you're only allowed Lone Stars, and you have to drink it while you're driving your truck. Voting for Trump.
Cowboy boots, hat, the whole deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we were saying. Well, nonetheless, I'm gonna post a picture of me drinking the Truly on the Patreon account, patreon.com/breakout finder, because I wanted to get the people riled up. I've been caping up for White Claw, but they're not getting back to us about the sponsorship. They're letting me down, so I've changed teams.
Truly it is. Okay.
Go on.
Well, listen, but before we change subjects here, bro, do you have any kind of, Scott obviously came over the top, as he always does, man, covered all the ground. Do you have anything else Colt-wise for us, for the listeners?
So ridiculous. I feel like that guy that entered the dunk contest, that people are like, why is he dunking? That doesn't make any sense. And then Scott went full Vince Carter out here. So I'm going to do
60.
my best. I love the take on Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett's not the step down that a lot of teams would experience if an elite franchise quarterback stepped away from the game. We would watch many other teams fall out of favor, fall out of the ranks. Scott makes great points about the tight end usage. I want to go kind of from a dynasty front here. I'm still a fan of Paris Campbell. I was a fan, coming out of the draft, pre-draft process. I don't know where Scott is on Paris Campbell as far as being a prospect, but to me, he's still a buy in this offense. There may be people wavering on ownership, and you can get him for less than he was originally. There's a lot of people in front of him. We assume that in terms of wide receivers, TY Hilton will still continue to be the most targeted player in this offense as far as the wide receivers are concerned. Devin Funchess, obviously a veteran receiver in this league. So Paris Campbell's progress may take a slight step back, but in terms of ownership, I'm still absolutely a fan of Paris Campbell, and I'm buying where I can, because there may be some fear from people that bought him early, knowing that his landing spot was hinged on playing with Andrew Luck.
Scott, any Paris Campbell thoughts, either pre-draft, post-draft, dynasty, redraft, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, if Paris Campbell's dynasty ADP takes a big hit, I'd buy into him. I really liked him coming out of college. One interesting note was, I kind of thought he was a perfect fit for Andrew Luck, but he also could have been, a bad fit, just in the sense that he was an elite yardage creator, minimal average depth of target, really high receiving yards, ranked really highly in depth adjusted yards per target. But Andrew Luck is as a thrower, the majority of his yardage comes on air yards rather than yards after the catch. So my thinking was, okay, this is Luck's never really had that guy. He's had to create his own yards on his own, but Paris Campbell is an elite yardage creator once the ball's in his hands. But maybe, Jacoby Brissett, much lower ADOT, could actually be more beneficial to him. But he's not going to do much early on this year, I don't think. Indianapolis is going were going 11 personnel more frequently, so he would be on the field a little bit more than were he on the team last year. But still, not expecting too much right off the bat. But he is, easily the second best wide receiver on the team, I think.
Absolutely. Beautiful, man. I'm excited. We got a Scott Barrett appearance, and we kind of shoehorned some Paris Campbell talking there, bro. So let's talk about a couple more wide receivers here before we open the doors to Scott's My Guys piece here. So Scott, in Pittsburgh, the wide receiver 2 spot, I believe, has been sewn up by Donte Moncrief. James Washington has flashed this preseason, but obviously his usage is something that we're really interested in this preseason. He's been running with Mason Rudolph and the twos. So the big plays, the exciting plays, the nice catches, the work after the catch, that has all come with the twos. Hasn't quite found his way, running opposite, say, Juju with the ones. So Scott, the wide receiver 2 position is profitable in Pittsburgh, assuming that we get 80% of what Ben did last year, 90% of what Ben did last year. Is there a particular player that you're leaning as far as Moncrief versus Washington, or are you completely fading both of them and turning to someone like a Vance McDonald?
Well, the debate is James Washington the team's wide receiver 2? Is he the team's wide receiver 3? And I'd argue he's not.
Okay.
So week 3 of preseason is typically the dress rehearsal week.
It's a bomb. So a little bit of a bomb. I like it.
So first string snaps, Juju Smith-Schuster, Donte Moncrief played on 18 of 20 snaps with Roethlisberger. Ryan Switzer played on 14 of 20. That's 70%. James Washington played on 0. This doesn't really surprise me. James Washington was PFF's worst rated wide receiver last year of 118 qualifiers. Towards the tail end of last season, the last 6 weeks of the season, Switzer outsnapped James Washington 184 to 160. So they were kind of trending in this direction anyway. Ryan Switzer is one of my guys. There's every year, there's 2 super, super deep dynasty guys. I just put my stamp on. Switzer was one of them when he came out. Greg Dortch is one of those guys this year.
Dortch, baby, let's go.
Right, that's right. But James Washington, if he wasn't so amazing this preseason, I'd say he's the world's easiest fade. The problem is he was awesome this preseason. He was PFF's second highest rated wide receiver, ranks first in yards per route run, first in yards per target. So we'll see what happens. I mean, clearly he flashed the talent this preseason, but Switzer still got the first string snap. So he's not someone I'm buying in redraft for sure. ADP way too high. Dynasty, that might be a different story. Maybe he's a buy low week 4 into the season when people realize he's the wide receiver 4 on the team.
Yeah, man, I got way too excited when Switzer found his way to Oakland. It was just wrong place, wrong time for him. Because I was with you, man. He had some of the best film coming out of North Carolina, and I was all in over Ryan Switzer. So obviously a short-lived stop for him. Nate, anything on the Pittsburgh wide receivers, or do you just want to spend the next 5 minutes talking about Greg Dortch?
Man, I want to talk about Greg Dortch. Let's talk about Greg Dortch. God, Scott Barrett, God bless you, man, for bringing up my favorite name amongst all the names that we've mentioned so far, minus Paris Campbell, one of my favorites. I would love to talk about Greg Dortch. This is a guy that's a sneaky guy to make this Jets roster. I mean, primarily for the kick return ability, but I think a lot of us loved him coming out of college. I'm sure Scott was a fan. I mean, he's undersized. That's what's working against him. And he didn't post the best pro day numbers, if I remember correctly.
No, he was good.
Was he? I thought he didn't put up
940.
What? But it was at his pro day, right?
Oh, right.
So, but either way, it's not slow, but adjust to a 4.5 something. But either way, the guy's still got enough athleticism. But I'm just a fan on a hyper-thin Jets wide receiver group. I think a lot of us believe in Robbie Anderson. I mean, from where he's come from, it's a pretty unbelievable story. But Greg Dortch is sneaky, and I talked about the Jamison Crowder thing, about how his contract has an out. He's a guy that I want to own in Dynasty on deep benches. It's hard if you have shallow benches. As far as the Pittsburgh Steelers situation, man, Scott just dropped a bomb on the whole show.
James Washington doesn't like James Washington. He's out on James Washington.
I mean, I'm with you. The thing with James Washington is he does offer that explosive playmaking ability that we've seen time and time again. Maybe with Mason Rudolph, he'd be a better fit when it's Mason's time and they've got that rapport versus Big Ben. I can see Donte Moncrief kind of being that tried and true guy, but the problem is I'm not sure that Donte Moncrief, I haven't seen it from him. And I realize he's played with poor quarterback play a majority of his career. He's never experienced this. He didn't have the Nick Foles train. He went with the Blake Bortles thing. I mean, he had Andrew Luck for a point, but he was kind of growing into his role. Here he is in Pittsburgh. I like him as the number 2. I'm just surprised that Scott's take is that we're not sure if James Washington is number 2. He's arguably maybe number 3. Do you have Deontay Johnson ahead of him?
No, it goes Juju Smith-Schuster, Donte Moncrief, Ryan Switzer, James Washington. That's just based on Pittsburgh's playing time this preseason.
Yeah, makes sense.
Who would I rather own, Deontay Johnson or James Washington? I would rather own Deontay Johnson. That's a guy PFF's main college analyst Mike Renner comped to Antonio Brown before Pittsburgh made that selection. And he's not the kind of guy who casually throws around comps to Antonio Brown. So I really believe in that guy's talent. Where James Washington I liked coming out, but literally our worst graded wide receiver last year. Devontae Adams turned it around, but outside of that, typically when you're grading, bottom 10%, that's a death knell.
Yeah.
You're going to be out of the league pretty soon.
Yeah, I know. I mean, he definitely had his following coming out of college. Had the production. I know the size was a little bit weird for some people. The Pittsburgh selection, I think, had people kind of perking back up. Pittsburgh has a pretty good track record with wide receivers. I guess the question is, as Nate kind of hinted at, is does he need a quarterback change? So to be determined in Pittsburgh. But it sounds to me like if you are drafting this weekend, you want to press the button on Donte Moncrief. You want to continue to let Washington slide down the board a little bit. So that's all. Go ahead, bro.
Scott, I got a question for you. This is totally off tangent because this is something I ran across, and I'm sure you see it on the show sheet here. It's this is important. This is non-football, but this is pretty important. So I'm going to lead off with this question, expecting a hard no. Scott, do you drive a Prius?
I don't. Live in Texas.
You live in
trucks, bro. He told you about the trucks.
That's right.
Lone
That's right. You
Stars
can take your Prius and your White Claw and get them the hell out of here. Get them out of the state. So here's my thing. A Prius is clearly the type of car that you own when you care about the environment, right? I mean, that's what this vehicle stands for. And ever since I started paying attention to Priuses on the road, I've counted as many as 4 of them throwing cigarettes out the window, which blew my mind because it seems like super counterintuitive, right? Like, what if you're smoking a cigarette in a Prius, you got to put it in the ashtray, or you got to come up with something. You can't be throwing it out the window, which leads me to my car wash experience. So you got to tell me if this is considered a boss move. And is that what the cool kids are still saying?
Boss?
I think
so.
Are they?
I think so.
Okay, things haven't changed. So get this. So I pull up to a car wash. I'm next in line to go through. And just in front of me is this guy driving a Prius with a full-length, freshly lit cigarette. And I am not making this next part up. Rather than putting it out or littering it, this guy full on rolls up his window with the cigarette still fully lit and enters the car wash. Here's the question. The car wash takes about 30 to 45 seconds. I don't know. Is that about right?
Give or take,
pass it on to the analytics community?
Yeah. That sounds about right.
Shit you not. And when this car gets to the other side, I am right behind him. The driver's window rolls down and fucking smoke bellows out the window. This guy finished his whole cigarette in this car. So my question is, how do you do it better than that? Scott, what are your thoughts on this situation? What should this guy have done?
I don't know. That just seems like such a massive boss move. It's like when my buddy used to, as a party trick, inhale his cigarette, drink a bunch of his beer, and then blow out smoke. I don't know, man. That's just a boss move. I mean, his Prius probably reeks of, Marlboro 27s, but
right. Resale tanked completely.
But the outside of the car looks great.
Listen, I want to be convenienced to where you're cleaning my car for me, but I don't want to be so inconvenienced that I have to, put out this cigarette.
Right. Like that guy's like, well, I guess I'm going to finish it. I'm not going to waste this thing. So, yeah, the guy finished the whole cigarette on the way through and just rolled down his window. Yeah, that guy's car definitely reeks. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, you're good, man. I can smell Buddy's car from here, man. Listen, before we're gonna march ahead right here. Scott's not doing the claws, but I'm gonna saddle up, man. It is officially 2 Claw Tuesday, so I'm gonna take another sip here before we.
I went with the Truly.
Bro, just put you gotta just put the Truly down for a little.
Has the Truly been banned in Texas, Scott, or it's all hard seltzer?
Yeah, all hard seltzer.
Okay,
banned. There's no such thing as hard seltzer. It's all soft.
Okay.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Nate, this is we got the wrong guest, wrong time, wrong all that stuff. Listen, Scott, soft. My boy. The My Guys piece, man. How long have you been writing the My Guys? Is that a recent thing for you? Is that I know last year it was really big. This is the piece that I hit you up with. It might have been February or March or something. I said, bro, as soon as you drop that, we gotta get you on the pod. So again, very excited to talk to you about this. Is this a recent endeavor for you? You've been doing this for a little while.
Yeah, I did this last year, and it was like one of my most viewed pieces. So we did it again this year. I wanted to make it into 4 pieces where it was just like a deep dive on each position.
Sure.
And then I wasn't allowed to do that. So I kind of just, talked about all the guys I'm sort of targeting. I actually dropped it on Reddit and they just trashed me for
really
the entirety of the day. Yeah. They hated it. Like Twitter loved it. It had like 1,000 favorites on Twitter, but Reddit was just like, oh, he named like 40 guy or I don't know, probably 20 guys. Like, you can't do that for a My Guys piece. And it's like, listen, in round 2, like, there's 3 similarly priced guys I want. Like, that's my tier range. And then outside of that, I don't care about it. But whatever, I get trashed. My feelings are hurt.
Nate's the Reddit, I guess, expert. He's been trying to. Him and I have been talking a little bit. He's been trying to get me to dip my toes a little bit more. I've noticed like it is worlds apart from the timeline on Twitter that we're used to. It's just a whole. We've shared a couple pieces from our website over there, and I think for the most part they've been accepted. They haven't been accepted, Nate.
They get smashed. No, okay. Like Reddit is the equivalent of like a zombie movie. You got to go out the door. You need food and ammunition. And they're out there and they don't care at all. Yeah, everything I put there, even if I finish a piece and I'm like, damn, that's a good one. That's a good one.
You're feeling good about it.
Post it on Reddit. It's like I post it 3 seconds later. It's like bloop on my phone. It goes trash. I'm like, oh, all right. Yeah. First dude, 3 seconds in. I love you.
They're like 20 years behind fantasy Twitter. It's really bad, especially in August. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't have much room to kind of talk and navigate right now. I'm starting to learn the ways of Reddit myself, and that's probably a weird thing to say in 2019. But nonetheless, we push forward, boys. Scott, quarterback, man. Let's talk about who you were highlighting on the quarterback side. Nate and I have talked about Lamar Jackson a ton. We are both Lamar Jackson guys, so obviously that is your guy at the very top of the list. So we don't have to spend a ton of time there since we've covered about all the Lamar Jackson ground that we need to cover. So who else we want to talk about here? Scott, Cam Newton got a name drop from you. Are you still, obviously post-injury? I know Ron Rivera came out today and said that the foot is no big deal and we're confident week 1. Has anything changed with Cam Newton from your end? Are you still confident going into the season?
Yeah, I think I dropped him like 6 or 7 spots in my rankings, which still means like I'm way higher on him than ADP. Yeah. The Konami code upside is why you love Cam, and this potentially hurts a little bit, though Ron Rivera said today he's not concerned at all about his status for week 1. So it seems like it's a mild, foot injury, and he's probably going to be fine. We'll see. Probably just means like a maybe slow start for the first few weeks, and then he's back to normal. Hopefully.
I like it, man. Yeah, we so a kind of, again, not quarterback talk per se, but we ask almost everybody that comes on the show, where do you stand personally with the DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, the great debate of 2019?
Yeah, I mean, I like DJ Moore. I was never super high on him, but he blew past my expectations last year. At price, I'm definitely grabbing Curtis Samuel.
Right, makes too much sense.
I had a pretty cool stat maybe a week or so ago that said basically he was, a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL at getting open, at separating in his first 2 years in the league. And NFL.com says the same thing with their advanced stats. The issue is, for whatever reason, Cam Newton was just far, terribly inaccurate, like one of the worst 5 rates among all quarterback to receiver connections, despite him getting open and despite his ADOT not being crazy high. And keep in mind, he did all this, so he's an elite separator in the NFL. And all the guys at the top of the list are all the guys you'd expect to be at the top of the list. So him popping out was a really big surprise. And keep in mind, he was a running back just 3 years ago. So clearly, so much room to grow, so much potential. And by everything everyone in that camp has said, beat writers, coaches, whatever, is that he's clearly made that next step. He's the MVP of camp. And I buy into it. I mean, I don't think Cam Newton's wide receivers are ever going to be, in that wide receiver 1 range. But, I dig Curtis for sure.
Yeah, Curtis ended up for me around that wide receiver 26 spot. I don't know if that's high or low compared to you, Scott, but I have DJ Moore right around wide receiver 25. So I'm pricing them both. When I'm drafting, I want to grab. I'm okay grabbing one or the other. This huge round pick discrepancy between the two right now just hasn't made sense for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned right here. Samuel's been kind of the camp superstar. So. Jumping ahead again, we don't talk about Baltimore Jackson. Everyone knows that Lamar Jackson is the nuts play. Dude, Dak Prescott and the Cowboys offense Nate and I haven't spent a ton of time on Dallas in general. So you mentioned Dak Prescott as another one of your guys. Obviously has that Konami code with his ability to move outside of the pocket. So I guess give us a little bit of insight as to why you are kind of leaning Dak or accepting Dak on your roster. Then we can kind of talk about some of his other kind of supporting members as well. Yeah.
So Lamar Jackson nuts play at quarterback, but Cam Newton. Dak Prescott. I don't think is too far behind him at all. He has guaranteed safety, but also more upside than you might think. So he's ranked 10th, and 6th in fantasy points in his first 3 seasons in the NFL. Where's his ADP? QB 18. Clearly, massive value based on his historical production. And why would we think he would be any less productive this year with a new offensive coordinator who's promising to increase the pace of play, increase the team's pass percentage, have Prescott run more frequently? He's coming off of a career high in rushing attempts per game last season. In college, people forget he was putting up absurd rushing numbers, but Dallas has not used him in that way. Once Amari Cooper joined the team in week 10, so the end of the season, Prescott ranked 3rd among all quarterbacks in fantasy points. I think the one concern is if Zeke doesn't come back. His splits without Zeke are pretty bad, but I do think Zeke comes back, and I do think he's a glaring value, and I think he's not just the safe floor play everyone thinks he is. I think he has legitimate, high-end upside this year because of that Konami code potential.
Absolutely. Nate, bro, you're it, bro. Tag, you're it. Let's talk about, bro, where you at with Amari Cooper? Where you at with Michael Gallup? And then we'll get Scott's thoughts as well. Do you want to talk about some of these pass catchers in Dallas?
Yeah, let's talk about it, man. Amari Cooper. I mean, obviously, we're all fans of Amari Cooper. His first couple years in Oakland were impressive. I mean, amongst the group that he was playing with, then some weird stuff went down, and it seemed like the team had given up on Amari Cooper, and there was something going on there. They finally got rid of Amari Cooper, trade him to Dallas. Things finally open up for him, playing with Dak Prescott, a very capable quarterback, one that obviously Scott's a fan of going into this year, and clearly he's a value based on his ADP versus what Scott had mentioned about his career fantasy production. And then I expect Michael Gallup to take a step forward this year. I know that they brought in Randall Cobb. There's not a ton of competition on this depth chart, and we've heard good things about Gallup all offseason. This is a guy that was, a big producer, had a reasonable college dominator, 75th percentile, 37.4. Last year was only targeted 68 times. We hope to see him take a step forward this year, only on 71% snap share. So I'm a fan of Gallup going into the season too, and I think he's going to be of value as well. I believe he's going in like the 22nd round. So, assuming, let's say even with an injury to Amari Cooper, that could vault him up, but he might have some wide receiver 4 flexibility from week to week. But it's just another name of somebody I'd like to own, and in Dynasty, it's definitely somebody I want.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, dude, any kind of Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup related thoughts? Do you see Gallup back? Because I think Nate's right. The buzz that I've seen, from the media out of Dallas camp is that Gallup's been looking good. I think he's flashed a couple big plays in preseason contests as well. Is Gallup someone that you see as a value, someone that you kind of have a priority, kind of late round target on, or someone that you're just kind of letting someone else take?
I'm kind of letting someone else take him. Although maybe I should like him more just because of how heavily I'm fading Amari. But Gallup was a guy I liked a lot coming out. He was a PFF favorite. I don't know, just not really a target of me. I'd rather draft Dak than his pass catchers.
That's again, I'm excited to hear you pump up Dak because again, not a player that that Nate and I have really talked about a ton, but I know guys like our boy Graham Barfield has him like maybe QB 10, QB 11. So Dak's definitely getting love. And rightfully so for the reasons that Scott laid out. The last quarterbacks I want to talk about, Scott, is kind of the QB2s. You mentioned a couple of them. My QB2s, Sean Siegel, the FF Contrarian, man, he kind of sold me on the Cincinnati attack. Andy Dalton is my Scott Fishbowl 9 quarterback, someone that I was kind of really high on for where he was going and what his potential output could be. Obviously, things changed when the offensive line started to get banged up. Things changed when AJ Green went down a little bit, but I'm still big on Joe Mixon, still big on Tyler Boyd continuing to ascend. So Andy Dalton has some interesting kind of QB2 upside for me. The other quarterback that I highlighted personally in my piece was Sam Darnold. You mentioned I think Kirk Cousins, Scott. You mentioned guys like Josh Allen. Do you want to sell us on Josh Allen, man? If Josh Allen's going to be your quarterback too, or your late round selection here, what do you like about the Buffalo Bill himself, Josh Allen?
So this one's super easy. It's just he has rushing, massive upside. He has his floor is garbage. I don't think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's going to be a starter for very long in the NFL. But he ranked first in fantasy points per game over the last 6 weeks of the season. He just scored the 4th most, I believe, rushing fantasy points per game of any quarterback since 2000. So long as he's running at the same rate he ran at last year, I think, he has a really good chance of being a QB1 just on the ground. It's just like an ideal Konami code where you run a lot, you're not an efficient passer, it doesn't matter at all. And he's being drafted as like QB 22. So he's just like an ideal, he's an ideal QB2 pick.
I like it, man. Nato, any kind of quarterback, QB2, QB1 nuggets, any Josh Allen takes? Do you want to just keep sipping your Truly and just keep it moving, or what?
I already finished the Truly because it's better than White Claw. I know I'm with him. I like Josh Allen. It's funny to say that it's
a really weird sentence.
He's garbage, but his floor is so high as a rusher. Obviously, he's going later than guys like Lamar. Clearly, he's going later than guys like Kyler, who we haven't seen throw a ball in a regular season game yet. The upside to Josh Allen is if he's throwing the ball well, because his floor is the rushing ability. But the upside is if he is throwing any touchdowns, or he does have any games where he actually has some good passing production. That's just a cherry on top, because we know he's going to run. Like Scott alluded to, you look at the last 5 weeks of the season when Josh Allen was, the quarterback that he was, putting up all these points. 3 of the games, he goes over 95 yards. 2 of the games, he goes over 100 yards. He scores 4 rushing touchdowns over that period of time. So we know that his value is his rushing ability. But, man, if he can throw the ball a little bit in there, I mean, one of the games, too, he rushes for 2, he throws for 3. That's the ultimate out of him. So if you can get a touchdown a week out of Josh Allen, man, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, the Konami code is alive and well, man. Hats up to our guy, Lord Reeves, of course, who gets a name drop every other episode or two for his phenomenal work, obviously. Scott, moving ahead to running back, buddy, you mentioned a little bit at the top of the show, kind of your bell cow approach, and you outlined it pretty well in your My Guys piece as well. So talk a little bit about your bell cow or bust approach and kind of how you approach the running back position in fantasy drafts.
Yeah, so it's basically just like I'm targeting running backs with bell cow potential or running backs who are bell cows and ignoring the one-dimensional running backs like Derrick Henry, who's not going to catch passes, James White, who's not going to be giving a lot of carries. Goes back to my work on weighted opportunity, expected fantasy points, actual opportunity, lots of things. But basically those one-dimensional running backs have a lower floor, lower ceiling, are more game script dependent, more volatile on a week-to-week basis. Like I said before, Marlon Mack scored 70% of his fantasy points in games Indianapolis won by 14 or more points. The rest of the time he was putting up wide RB 46 numbers, something like that. Were you smart enough to only start him in games Indianapolis was heavily favored, or were you eating, like 5-point games and then benching him during blow up weeks?
Yeah.
So it's just a bunch of things like that. But basically, I think Chris Carson's like one exception, but I basically outlined the running backs I like as bell cows. At the top of the draft, the first 4 picks easily to me are Saquon, Christian, Kamara, David Johnson. People aren't sold on David Johnson, but I think he's closer to being, pick 2 than he is to being pick 6.
I like it.
James Conner's up there. Dalvin Cook, I think, has legitimate top 5 upside this year. Mm-hmm. Leonard Fournette, top 5 upside this year. Josh Jacobs, I think he's going to get easy RB1 usage, which means I think he's going to be an RB1. Kerryon Johnson, I'm waffling on. So they released Theo Riddick. I thought that was amazing for him, but they keep talking of Ty Johnson as the potential pass catching back, which would make this a gross 3-way committee. Ty Johnson didn't catch any passes in college. No other running backs on the team have caught, are as good of pass catchers as Kerryon. CJ Anderson certainly isn't.
I think the biggest news out of Detroit is they just lost their center, Frank Ragnow. He went down during the last preseason contest. I think it looked bad. He might have got carted off. I don't know if it out indefinitely or what the injury kind of entailed, but I know that's kind of the big point out of Detroit. But I can understand where Scott's coming from as far as kind of waffling back and forth here. Nate, you were shaking your head intently, bro. You're not worried about the Ty Johnson noise. You're not worried about the CJ Anderson noise, man. You appear to be all in on Kerryon.
So Frank Ragnow just suffered a minor ankle sprain in the 3rd preseason game.
Wheels up, then, boys. Wheels up.
I'm not worried about Ty Johnson in terms of being a pass catcher. We understand that Ty Johnson's upside is just electric playmaking ability. In college, he didn't really show it. That doesn't mean that he can't do it. We've used that phrase a ton on here. I use it with Paris Campbell all the time. With that being said, I don't know why we're waffling on Kerryon Johnson. I mean, Kerryon Johnson can do it all, and he does it all at a very efficient level and does it better than most of the league. This is a young running back. I'm not sure that Kerryon Johnson's even 23 years old yet. Is he? Maybe he's right at 23. This is an offense that talked about early on wanting to run the ball, establish the run, if you will. But we know that Kerryon Johnson is a great pass catcher. And I believe the stat was that Matthew Stafford targeted the running back position 138 times in 2018, I believe. So there's obviously going to be targets to be had. I'm not sure what his competition is. I don't believe it's C.J. Anderson on a 1-year deal, even though he had a couple of blow-up games when he was playing for arguably the best offense in the league with the Los Angeles Rams. I like 6th-round pick Ty Johnson. I'm not sure that he's really a threat. Zach Zenner is kind of a placeholder in this offense.
Gonzo, dude, he got released.
Oh, did he get cut?
He
Okay,
got released,
all right.
Yeah.
So Zach Zenner's gone too. So they're obviously shoring this thing up. I believe that Kerryon Johnson's going to get the lion's share of the workload. What will his ultimate ceiling be? That's the question. My concern is not, are people going to necessarily eat into his workload? It's more or less, how much are they going to let him roll with week to week? And I believe, based on what I've heard, that the usage will be high, but there's no doubt that Ty Johnson is an explosive, talented player. But Kerryon Johnson just does everything so well, and he's not a liability when he's on the field.
Scott, I ended up with Kerryon at or around running back 14, which kind of placed him in the 3rd round for me. Would that be higher or lower than where you would be either taking him or comfortable taking him?
Where'd you have him?
I had him at RB14.
I have him RB14.
Perfect. Look at that. So that's a third round pick for me. Again, the Ragnow stuff is what I was kind of waiting on. Good to hear that was just a minor thing. So as far as your guys, again, still sticking with the running back theme as we close out this category here, Scott. You obviously you highlighted, of course, they're if not the most talked about running back, one of the most talked about running backs is Darwin Thompson, and that whole Kansas City Chiefs situation. I know you highlighted him. Dave Montgomery is a player I think you were talking about early this offseason and maybe more so nowadays. I believe you've maybe even ticked him up a little bit compared to consensus. Any of these rookie runners you really want to highlight, Scott, here, as far as whether it's Thompson, whether it's Montgomery, whether it's Sanders, et cetera, et cetera. Are there a couple backs here that you cannot leave drafts without?
So I said that about Darwin Thompson, but at the time he was ADP RB 53. Now he's moved up 20 spots from there. I still feel really strongly about him, especially if you're a Damian Williams owner.
Right.
I think his ADP is fine, but you really don't want to leave the draft without Thompson. Justice Hill, I like a little bit less. Tony Pollard, I like in between the two running backs. I just think Zeke comes back, and I think he comes back
for sure
fairly soon. David Montgomery, since probably my best call that no one knows about was on ESPN Chicago radio before the draft. And I said, the Bears are going to trade up for a running back. And I thought, if you asked me who they should trade up for, I would say David Montgomery, who is my RB1 pre-draft. Love the talent, just a ton of missed tackles forced, broke a bunch of PFF records. He's a great pass catcher, great pass blocker, all the words coming out of camp, all the indications from the coaching staff, from Nagy's history, from, selling Jordan Howard for pennies on the dollar, from, interviewing 20 different running backs during the pre-draft process, et cetera, just indicates that, they wanted to give Tariq Cohen significantly less work. Maybe it was his 11 fumbles in 2 years. They gave people make a big deal out of the Mike Davis contract. They gave him no real guaranteed money.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's going to be a bell cow. I don't know if we see it immediately, but I think we see bell cow usage. And, Nagy used Hunt as a bell cow when he was calling plays for the Chiefs 2 seasons ago. And that matters just as much to me as, what he was doing last year with two of the most one-dimensional running backs in NFL history. Jordan Howard, insane drop rate, Tariq Cohen, super undersized. Love all those rookies. I like him. And Darrell Henderson.
There you go. Okay. Henderson was a guy that started off obviously everyone was way over their skis, and that's settled down a little bit here.
Right. I mean, now they're talking about Gurley's going to see 80% of what he saw last year, in which case he's a top 5 pick. But I really don't buy that. I also think Malcolm Brown is probably the handcuff were Gurley to go down. But I do think Sean McVay views Henderson as a potential Alvin Kamara element to this offense. I do believe that. I think he has the talent to be something like that. So now, I mean, like his ADP fell a lot. So I don't draft. I target bell cows, but I think I can make an exception for Henderson.
I like it, man. So we got asterisks on Henderson. We got asterisks on Chris Carson. Nate, man, I tried to make amends last episode, an episode or two ago. We've again, we certainly weren't as high as Scott was on David Montgomery, but we weren't necessarily the biggest fans of him. And again, we talked about you maybe photoshopping some bricks on his feet and the jokes that may or may not have ensued. So obviously Scott said his piece about Montgomery in the Chicago Bears situation. Nate, before we move on to wide receiver, anything on? Do you want to get something off your chest, man? Are you just gonna keep the photoshops coming, or where do we kind of stand here?
I know, man. I was cool with Scott until his take on David Montgomery, and I don't like him. I see the allure of David Montgomery. We talked about the tackle breaking. We talked about the pass catching ability. We also noted the lack of real superior athleticism. His agility score is kind of in that reasonable range where players have hit in the past. If you're using, kind of like the historical metrics, he's got a 55th percentile agility score. My concern, though, and Scott seems to be less concerned about this, it kind of is in the same ilk as Marlon Mack. I realize that Nagy may be talking about kind of the pulling back on Tariq Cohen a little bit. But last year in Chicago, Tariq Cohen had 91 targets. And I realized Allen Robinson missed time and Anthony Miller was developing, and there wasn't a lot of weapons in this offense. But it's hard to believe that Tariq Cohen isn't going to still see a reasonable amount of targets and a reasonable amount of kind of spelled rushing opportunity in this offense. So I believe that David Montgomery will get a bulk of the work, but I guess I question when we're talking about, let's say, David Montgomery, even versus Kerryon Johnson, what's the insurance? I guess you can go back to the historical usage of Kareem Hunt, but what's the reality that Tariq Cohen isn't kind of a factor in here, and Mike Davis isn't kind of a factor in here, and that David Montgomery is actually a hit at the next level with the superior athletes, with the smarter players, with the bigger players, especially having that lack of athleticism and coming out of Iowa State.
Right. I mean, again, I think if you're drafting off volume alone, I mean, Montgomery, as Scott said, whether he's a bell cow within the first 3 weeks or from weeks 4 through 6, I think that's kind of the path that he's on. So Scott, I mean, again, as Nate said, you might not be as concerned about the perhaps underwhelming athleticism, but you kind of see the upside in other facets of his game.
Yeah. So just with regard to the athleticism, I have what's been referred to as a plotter fetish, where I just
we're all about fetishes on the show, man. Just let it out. This is a safe space, bro.
Safe space. Okay. I don't really care too much about that with running backs. If you're an elite tackle breaker like Kareem Hunt, David Montgomery, so he's just easily like an archetypal sort of running back that I would gravitate towards. Tariq Cohen, I really just don't think Nagy likes him, and all the comments coming out of camp from multiple very trusted sources like Dan Graziano, I don't know, other ESPN names, is just that they really like David Montgomery in the passing game. Tariq Cohen's going to see less work. And I think they view Cohen as one-dimensional, where he sort of tips your play-calling hand. Oh, guys, Tariq Cohen's coming on the field. It's going to be a passing play. Also, ridiculous fumble rate. Leads the league in fumbles last year, over the past 2 years, among all running backs. And on not too many touches. And like I said, I think they've been trying to go this route for a while to redo their running back room, to draft a bell cow running back who can play all 3 downs. And Montgomery has massive draft capital behind him. You're not going to spend all that and sell Howard for pennies on the dollar unless you view him as something more than Howard, something who can do something Howard couldn't do, like catch passes and play all 3 downs and pass block, etc. Right. But all this being said, yeah, there's a reason Kerryon Johnson's RB14 and David Montgomery's RB18. But Also, even if it is just an early down role for Montgomery, should be valuable. Bears have probably the best defense in the NFL, should have plenty of positive game script. Also, Mitch Trubisky sucks. I don't know if you guys knew that or not.
Dude, we were talking about how Trubisky might be cheeks, bro. He might not be good.
PFF basically, if you follow our grading and our advanced stats, it's just basically Mitch Trubisky = Blake Bortles.
Yikes. Not good, dude. Yeah, and again, we had Sigmund Bloom on here a couple weeks back, and I am a Allen Robinson owner in the Scott Fish Bowl. I know Sig selected Allen Robinson a few rounds ahead of where I got him. I got him in like the 9th round. He was sliding. Sig might have had him in the 5th or 6th or something. I love Allen Robinson. Trey Burton, I know everyone was on him last year, but these pass catchers, man, again, I have, as much as I like Allen Robinson's raw talent, man, we got to get him a real quarterback. Going from Bortles to Trubisky, it's just not fair. And I think, he's healthy now, and I want to believe in Allen Robinson, but to your point, man, that the whole Trubisky setup is scary. It's not, and again, it's going to benefit, you imagine, maybe someone like a David Montgomery. They're going to kind of funnel things through the ground. Montgomery ended up at running back 22 for me, running back 18 for Scott over here. So again, more of the story as far as running backs and selecting your guys is you really want to target some of these rookie runners, man. Whether it's Darwin Thompson, whether it's David Montgomery, whether it's Miles Sanders, there's someone for somebody in almost every round, it seems. The Tony Pollard thing is interesting to me too, just because I think there is legit talent there. But I'm with Scott. I think this Elliott deal gets done sooner rather than later, and then obviously Pollard's Pollard's more or less going to kind of slink back down to ghost status. Moving on to wide receivers, boys. Scott, a couple other players that you had highlighted that Nate and I haven't talked about over the past month, so I'm excited to get these guys out in the open. We know about the Christian Kirks, the DJ Moores, the Curtis Samuels, the Calvin Ridleys, that kind of middle round group. A couple names that again haven't been discussed on this pod that I haven't seen talked up a bunch. Golden Tate out of New York, man. Is that your New York fandom speaking, bro, or what do you got for us related to Golden Tate?
Yo, if I let my Giants fandom influence anything, I would be the worst fantasy analyst ever.
Fair enough.
Golden Tate is just a smash value, and I kind of always chase these guys who are suspended to start the season. Maybe it's just because the first time I did it was Josh Gordon, and he crushed for me.
Worked out.
But really, it's just like the ADP drop is massive in comparison to the advantage he's going to give you when he's on the field. And I do think he's the number one wide receiver on this team. I think he's the best receiver on this team. For a long time now, I've held that Golden Tate is probably the most underrated wide receiver or slot wide receiver in the NFL. And it's just, if you look at his numbers with the ball in his hands, he does absurd things, like missed tackles forced per touch, yards after the catch per reception, ranks like top 3 out of 100 and something qualifying wide receivers every single year. No one else comes close. Yeah. Never really liked Sterling Shepard. OBJ is not there. Volume has to go somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. He's basically free.
Yeah. Nate, I'm a little. I fancy myself a bit of a Sterling Shepard guy, but I totally get. Actually, going back to the whole Reddit thing, one of the many comments that my top 200 piece got was just how low that I had Golden Tate, and I agree with Scott. I think where he's being taken versus where he's probably going into producing. So I think generously bumping him up the list it is warranted. Nate, any Giants takes post Odell Beckham? Do we even care about Giants pass catchers?
I mean, we don't love Giants pass catchers, but I think Evan Ingram needs to continue to stay in that mix of players that you want to own in this offense if you're going to own anybody. But to Scott's point, I do love the suspension as a value to a guy like Golden Tate. I mean, everywhere that he's gone over the past couple of years, we've seen him targeted heavily, multiple seasons of 90 catches in a row. Everybody knows about his yards after the catch. He's an absolute monster and a creator with the ball in his hand. I'm definitely a fan of Golden Tate. I like Sterling Shepard. I felt like his development has continued to get better. I'm not sure that Eli Manning is the quarterback for him. I'm not sure that Daniel Jones will be the quarterback. I guess we'll find out when that torch gets passed. But similar to kind of Golden Tate, I've been picking up A.J. Green in drafts kind of late with this injury.
Yep, me too.
Right? And like what I figure his upside is, and to Scott's point, like there's these guys that people are letting fall because they don't want to take the risk of waiting a couple of weeks for them to come back, where my plan in drafts has been go in, get the surefire guys, get the bell cow running backs, get the volume wide receivers, and then when I hit that saturation point where I can't wait any longer to grab an A.J. Green, I grab him because I've shored up my wide receiver group with, the wide receivers that I trust. And when he comes back, he's just a mega value to your roster. And to that point, that's Golden Tate all day because he's going to get targeted. He's going to be open. And a wide receiver like him, I can't imagine Eli Manning not falling in love with Golden Tate's traits.
Yeah. No, Green was a guy that I thought was I don't want to say massively undervalued, but where his ADP was pre-injury was super wonky. He's always been one of my favorite wideouts in the league. Just someone that I think has been, I don't want to say underrated either, but Green hasn't had the fairest of circumstances, let's say. So definitely a good call there. The other name that I had highlighted out of your piece, Scott, was Anthony Miller, not a name that Nate and I have touched on a ton this offseason, so I'm interested to get your thoughts on him. Again, we kind of talked about Mitch Trubisky and how he more or less kind of caps things over there in Chicago. So what do you see with Anthony Miller? Is it just a pure talent play, or do you believe in that Miller Trubisky connection?
Yeah, it's I don't like Trubisky, but historically, dating back to college, all he's ever done is targeted the slot wide receiver at an incredibly high rate with good efficiency, and then low rates and bad efficiency everywhere else. Anthony Miller, going to be the slot wide receiver, was a really good slot wide receiver in college. And I'm willing to write off a lot of his rookie season because he was dealing with a shoulder that popped out maybe 5 or 6 times throughout the season.
It's crazy.
Still led the team in receiving touchdowns. So, optimistic with him.
Yeah. So we got the Golden Tate tout. We got the Anthony Miller tout, I guess we can call it. You guys both, all of us, we all shook our head agreeingly on AJ Green. Scott, before we close things out with tight end, man, any other wideouts that are either high on your list that you mentioned in my guys, or guys that you've come back around to, any type of, do you have a league winning nugget for any of these listeners out there?
There's some pressure on me right there. I was just going to say, Allen Robinson is another guy I like you. Josh Gordon, I kept waiting for him, all right, well, his ADP is going to climb and it's going to settle to something egregious. And then it just stopped somewhere. And I was like, wait, that's 2 rounds too low.
Right.
So he's a value. Tyler Lockett, one of my guys. Big nugget. This sounds like a hot take. You can read my Twitter thread on it, but I think there's a really good chance Chris Godwin outscores Mike Evans this year.
Whew. A little bit of pepper on that one, bro. I like it though. I've been big on Evans. I know Matt Kelly and Nate probably in the Sonic Truth Pod have talked about Mike Evans and his compiling ways. Obviously the addition of Bruce Arians. That dude. The thing with Godwin for me, I'm a believer in the talent. As obviously you are, Scott. The ADP has just gotten away from me from the beginning. In that range. I think he makes sense, but I find myself, for whatever reason, just looking elsewhere. That's probably a mistake of sorts. I mean, I own him a good bit, and again, I definitely understand the love. What's your kind of basis of this hot take, Scott?
Basically, it comes down to regime uncertainty.
Okay.
We saw Mike Evans get consistent elite wide receiver 1 usage with Dirk Cutter. And he wasn't very efficient, whether that's on him or Winston. I think it's on Winston, but it doesn't really matter because Winston's still the starting quarterback. What have we heard from Bruce Arians, who, said he was going to run David Johnson until the wheels fell off in 2016, did just that. So a history of saying outlandish things that turned out to be true. Said that Godwin's going to be on the field for every play. He's been on the field every play this preseason, said he's going to be the slot wide receiver, the Larry Fitzgerald type. That's what he's done this preseason. Said he could catch 100 balls this year. If that's true, he's the wide receiver one. Over the past 2 seasons, Evans has averaged, 78 catches per season?
Yeah.
And it's just throughout Bruce Arians' history, his slot wide receivers rank like top 5 in fantasy points, in targets, clearly loves to throw to the slot. So I'm expecting big things. I just don't think it's crazy if that Godwin might outscore Evans this year, but I do understand it's a hot take for some people.
No, we're all about the takes around here, man, hot or otherwise. So I appreciate you dropping that over here, Nate. Before we march on to the tight end, the last group here, anything wide receiver related that you want to throw out there, man? Do you have a hot take of your own? Do you have a wide receiver you tend to be gravitating towards more so than ADP would suggest?
I mean, I kind of said mine was AJ Green. That's been the one that I've been chasing, especially with Tyler Boyd's emergence. But I'm with you on the Chris Godwin thing. This is something we've talked about, me and Matt Kelly on the Sonic Truth Pod, that it is absolutely not crazy to think that Chris Godwin is the wide receiver one in this offense at the end of, this upcoming season. The target share has just always been so ridiculously heavy in favor of Mike Evans, with no real young, clear, kind of second wide receiver. But with the ascension of Chris Godwin now, I'm excited. I mean, even if they go, blow for blow in targets, 140 targets each, I do expect Chris Godwin to really soar in this offense, and it's a good call. I don't think it's crazy at all. And I'm with him also as a Seahawks homer. Man, Tyler Lockett is the guy. David Moore goes down. DK Metcalf is a work in progress. He's hurt. There's just not a lot of options. Gary Jennings hasn't done anything yet. Jazz Ferguson is an undrafted free agent. So who's going to emerge in this offense? It could be Tyler Lockett's season all day over there, even in an offense where Russell Wilson may not throw inside the top 15, but assuredly we're going to see him take a step up from where he was last year, in the bottom 30. So I'm a fan of Tyler Lockett also.
I like it, man. Well, boys, we'll keep the tight end short and sweet, as the tight end deserves. Really, not a ton to talk about here. Just year over year, a really tough position to really kind of pin down. Scott, you went on the couch with Uncle Sig a handful of weeks back. You talked up Mark Andrews, or Sig did. Both you guys agreed. Nate and I have mentioned Mark Andrews again in that Baltimore offense, what seems like every single show. So outside of the Mark Andrews plan, Scott, is there where do you find yourself going tight end wise as far as your guys are concerned?
Yeah, so I kind of liked how I laid this out in the article, where it's just basically, here are the tiers. It's the big three: Kelsey, Kittle, Ertz, all priced perfectly. I like Kelsey, whenever he falls into round 2. And then you have the young big three, which is OJ Howard, Evan Ingram, Hunter Henry, all priced about where they should go. Like them all just fine. Then the next tier, Jared Cook and maybe Vance McDonald. Recent comments suggested Vance McDonald is not going to see any increase in snap share, which would be absurd because he was on the field only 50% of the time last year and was amazing. But preseason usage suggests, no, he's going to be on the field 95% of the time. So that contradicts the offensive coordinator. So it's hard to tell what to believe, his actions or his words.
Right.
And then if I don't land any of those guys, I still feel fine because I'm going to grab Delaney Walker as my tight end 1. And then one of these guys is my tight end 2. Mark Andrews, who I love, but worry about usage. He's just a part-time player this preseason. That's stupid. He's so good. Just the other guys suck. Nick Boyle sucks.
Dude, Hayden Hurst is 42 at least.
Garbage. I said, in my write-up on that draft, was just the Ravens picked the tight ends in the wrong order.
100%.
Andrew should have been round 1. But anyway, Darren Waller, Jordan Reed, Jack Doyle, Greg Olsen. All those guys. I'm fine with those 2 if I don't land one of the big-name guys. I'm fading everyone else. Austin Hooper, David Njoku.
Whoa.
Eric Ebron, no part of them.
Right. bro. But before we let Nate just jump in off the top row here, man. Last year, Scotty, you had me. I was perfectly content with myself, within myself, that I was completely out on Jordan Reed last year. You roped me back in, man, and I had way too much Jordan Reed, man. But this year, he's got he got. I mean, it's pretty scary at this point. All jokes aside, I mean, this was his 7th or 8th, documented concussion. So I mean, it's just it's been scary for Jordan Howard, but. Kind of going back to that fantasy football standpoint is we're told throughout camp he looked as healthy as he's ever been. The toe injury was behind him. So and a lot of the beat guys, I had one of them actually respond to me, and I can't remember his name, from NBC I believe, but he basically said, it might have been referencing your article last year, Scott, where the guy said, listen, 1 year too early, this is the Jordan Reed year. So I'm with you, man. I imagine maybe that ADP is going to fall a little bit given the most recent injury, the most recent concussion. So I'm all in again, for better for worse, on Jordan Reed. Nate, man, you didn't like Scott's Hooper shade or David and Njoku shade, man. What do you got going on up there as far as tight end takes?
I mean, I got my first question to Scott with his fade of David Njoku. Just answer this for me, Scott. Is your primary reason target share?
No, I also don't think he's very good.
Oh my.
The front office has been hypercritical of him all offseason. He hasn't really showed us much. He graded really poorly last year, led the position in drops. And then he has to compete against Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Hollywood Higgins, who PFF loves and has always loved. On top of that, once Freddie Kitchens took over as offensive coordinator, team ranked 4th worst in plays per game. So, and they have, once Kareem Hunt comes back from suspension, the best running back room in all of football. I just have a hard time seeing him being worthwhile for fantasy.
I mean, looking at David Njoku last year, looking at the yards after the catch ranking inside the top 10. I mean, this is all on the number 7 targets at the position, receiving yards in the top 8, receptions in the top 8. This is also a guy that didn't benefit from an Odell Beckham running out wide in an offense that's going to be forced to roll safety coverage, roll defensive coverage in his position. I mean, they were heavily targeting Jarvis Landry, who's arguably the least athletic wide receiver in the NFL at this point in time. Jarvis Landry was targeted almost 150 times last year, and he averaged, 12 yards per reception. So he's not a downfield threat. So adding in a guy like Odell Beckham, I feel like opens things up. But I'm with you. In terms of that backfield, I think that's also a benefit as well, to have Kareem Hunt's, versatility, to have Nick Chubb entering another season, forcing defenses to play that a little more fair, and then also Odell running down the field. I don't know that hurts Njoku. I would expect him to take a step forward. I mean, entering another season, I think the guy's, what is he? I don't know if he's 23 years old. He's just 23 years old, so a hyper young tight end who, coming out of Miami had big time, downfield production, but was a guy that didn't have it in, in spades. But early breakout age, hyper athletic, a quarterback that I think we all believe is going to throw more than 486 times he did last year. I mean, the team threw it 574. Baker was only in there for 14 games. So I just believe there's a lot of breadcrumbs here that lead me to believe that David Njoku could replicate at least the target share, even with Odell Beckham potentially, knowing that Baker Mayfield's going to be the passer in this offense, and those 85 attempts that Tyrod Taylor threw last year, it's going to be coming from a more efficient, more creative passer in Baker Mayfield. And I just think that a couple of these things working in conjunction could be a benefit to David Njoku this year.
I like it, man. Boys, that was about as much tight end talk as one could stomach. I like the Delaney Walker fallback a lot. That's kind of where I find myself turning in drafts. If I don't get one of those top 3 or 4 guys, I'm going to be really heavy on OJ Howard. So I don't know what that says about. I think it's I find myself with a lot of Godwin, OJ Howard teams, which is interesting. But big on OJ Howard this year. Scott, man, this was a whirlwind, brother. I know I'm I'm a little warm. You got to be nice and cool, pantless over there, doing whatever you're doing. Scott, why don't you go ahead and plug whatever you got to plug? Tell them where to find you on Twitter. Tell them about where all your work is and all that, and then we'll let Nate do the same, and we'll get the hell out of here.
Yeah, Scott Barrett at Scott Barrett DFB on Twitter. Get a PFF subscription if you feel like it.
There it is.
Retweet my articles when you see them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. Scott, you're doing the Lord's work even without a camera. I'm gonna send you one. I'm gonna send you a new webcam.
Send him one and then get it back on the show.
Yeah, exactly. We need you back on here with video, but you'll like what you see when you watch this episode back, man. I appreciate you coming on here, dude. Honestly, you're one of the best in the industry, and I appreciate you coming on and spending time with us and dropping nuggets for all these people that have been consuming this content. And to all the listeners, again, like we always talk about, go to iTunes, rate it, review it. Tell Ryan that you want him to zip up his turtleneck or whatever that is.
Give us, man. This is what we wear over here.
Give us some feedback. We're starting listener leagues.
I'm upset with you.
We're starting listener leagues with the Patreon account. So again, patreon.com/breakout finder. Check that out. We'll get more people involved. Thanks again for listening. This podcast is doing super well. And again, Scott, thank you very much for coming on, man. You're a blast.
Scott Barrett, man. Cheers,
thank
brother.
Thank you, guys.